you like books or movies or TV shows or songs with lyrics? You know, things that were created by writers? Of course you do. Do you like watching people type? I doubt it. Do you like hearing people tell you about how they came up with the things they type? Maybe. And there are lots of shows like that. But this isn't one of them. Do you ever procrastinate? Writers do too. So if you've ever enjoyed a great book or film or TV show or song or poem, and you thought, I'll bet the woman who wrote this epic high fantasy TV series, or the guy who wrote this funny queer sci-fi novel, or the person who writes this punch you in the gut poetry would be really fun to hang out with, and I'd like to hear them confess their bad not writing habits. You're in the right not writing place. I'm Benjamin Gorman, and the quiet guy behind the glass there is Doug, the producer. Hey, Doug. I write novels and collections of poetry and stuff, and Doug does his best to try to make me sound better. From Not a Pipe Publishing, welcome to Writers Not Writing. This week's secret word, and you'll want to listen for this, is the word present, because you know, the holiday season. So listen for the word present. Welcome to Writers Not Writing. Today's guest is Marie Parks. By day, she's a content strategist and copywriter for small businesses and authors. By night, she's disappearing into her writing, which takes place in fantasy worlds. All of this happens in the magical, enchanting land of New Mexico, where Marie lives with her 2 rescue dogs. And I want to brag a little bit more about Marie. Speaking of New Mexico, Marie Parks and her writing partner, Jesse Annard, won the New Mexico and Arizona Book Award for Best LGBT Novel with their debut, Unrelenting. It had previously won the Book Pipeline Unpublished contest, and that's how I became aware of it the first time. So writers, that Book Pipeline contest works. And everybody, you need to get a hold of Unrelenting to find out why it's getting so much critical attention, because it's fantastic. So congratulations, Marie, and thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you so much, Ben. Yeah, I mean, we're super fans, Jesse and I being we, not like the royal we of Not a Pipe, of you and Vivica, and just the way you all operate. And yeah, it's honestly been such an honor to be part of the Not a Pipe family.
Well, and I can tell you committed to the bit because you went full out in terms of your costume for today. So one of the things we do before we get into the topics of how we procrastinate is share with everybody how we dressed up. And of course, the folks watching on YouTube can see this, but for those who are listening to the podcast, how did you dress up today for the show?
Well, I'm wearing my very best pinstripe suit today because one of my current projects, when I'm not, working or working on my novels, is I'm collaborating on creating an in-person murder mystery dinner party at a local speakeasy. It's sort of 1920s style. So I've got a lovely little cravat here and a little peacock feather in my hair for a little extra flair. But I'm committing to that look to get ready for that project.
I like what you've done with the pocket square. And now, did you have to? I've only worn a pocket square in a suit one time before, and I admit I had to look it up on YouTube. Did you have to look up how to fold it in that way with the 3 ridges like that?
Yes, I did. And I got it wrong like 17 times.
Of course. Yes.
But,
People make it look very easy in their short video. Oh, it's no problem. It's, here's this little fabric origami that you're doing. But, well, you look fantastic. That is an awesome costume.
Thank you.
I went with a white tux because I wanted to go with kind of a similar vibe, but with the band leaders of that era, the 20s band leader. And I didn't think about the fact that a person as pale as I am should never, ever wear a white tux. I am just an enormous white blob. This is not a good look for me. So those of you who are listening to the podcast, bald white guy in a white tux, not a good look. So you're not missing anything.
Give yourself some credit. I think you look very dapper.
Well,
and
thank you.
I mean, if you really want to commit to the all white, like maybe it's a haunted speakeasy. I don't know.
Oh yes, yes. I've got the ghost band leader thing down. Yes. Well, and I used to, I mean, for some contrast, I had a beard, shaved that off because the band leaders, the look was, I went with this little thin mustache, painted
Yes.
on mustache. And that's whenever I shave my beard, I always regret it. Like immediately. Like, why did I do that? And so I'm sure tomorrow I'll start back on the process of growing the beard out. But yeah, folks can envision I've got the thin pencil mustache and just the palest human being in the history of whiteness. So it's pretty gross.
Very committed. No, you look great. You look great.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so this is a show about not writing. So when you this last week, as you have been not writing, what movie, pop culture, what's been getting in the way of your writing this week?
Yeah, very distractible person. I actually have two things. One is I just discovered this like 2 days ago. It's a video game called House Flipper Game.
It's
Way more
so
addictive than it sounds. But what's been a little bit more enduring of a distraction this week is I I decided to start watching Shadow and Bone on Netflix because, one of those people who's like, I want to read the book first. So I still haven't actually read Shadow and Bone, but I did read Six of Crows and I did read Crooked Kingdom earlier this year and loved them. And so I was like, okay, now I have permission because at least I know like half of the story.
and I've watched the show, but I have not read the books either. Are Six
Okay.
of Crows and Crooked Kingdom same universe, but before?
Yes.
Okay.
So basically, like in the TV show, there's sort of two plot lines happening. You already know this, Ben, because you've seen the show. But if anyone's like listening or watching and they aren't familiar with it, there's sort of two plot lines. There's one that's sort of a YA, special girl has special abilities,
Right.
and could save the world. And then there's another plot line that's a heist.
Yeah.
And so Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom are the heist crew.
Oh,
Um,
okay. I
yes,
was going to
which
say,
to
why would
me
they
is
choose as a TV show to not start at the beginning? But because the stories are split and
right,
simultaneous, they
right. I
choose to
don't,
tell both, stories on the show.
right.
That is,
Um,
I really enjoyed that show. I like the
yeah,
premise of the world, that idea, and I'm still not sure on the geography. This is when you're a fantasy nerd. I was like, I need a map. I want a map. I want
yes,
to be able to flip to the front. Is the
yes.
the kind of magical wall between the kingdoms or on the edge of the world, or how does that function in that universe?
I don't know how to answer this question because the wall is, if it's mentioned in those two books, it plays no role, and I completely forgot about it.
Okay, because
It's
it's
really
so
like,
important in the series is,
yes,
who can
yes,
traverse this magical barrier. And I was
right.
like, are they looking for like a northern passage, but it's blocked off by this magical event? Or is this straight down the middle in the middle of this kind of empire? And so I was like, I need a map. I need a map.
Yeah, Six of Crows, they do travel, but they're not looking for Special Girl. They go to a completely different, it's like a completely different heist, but it's the same cast of characters and some of the same, tropes and things like that happening. So, yeah, they definitely took some liberties with it, but that's the part I'm living for personally. It's like anytime Kaz and his crew come on, I'm like, yes.
They're the people I know. Well, and it would have been really fun to write, to take a series that was written in that way and to use a whiteboard like you've got in your office and try and figure out how are we going to connect these.
Yeah,
That would have been I would have loved being in that writer's room. How are we going
I
to make
know.
these two, work? I mean, it could be that Shadow and Bone answers all those questions. Neither of us have read it yet, but
I know, yeah. Now I do have it, so maybe that'll be my next read. So, what about you? What's been distracting you this week?
so Crystal convinced me the other day to watch Long Shot, which is, have you ever seen Long Shot? So
No.
it's Charlize Theron and Seth Rogen, and I am not a particularly big Seth Rogen fan, but my crush on Charlize Theron, makes up for it. And it turns out that's exactly Crystal's response before she saw it the first time too. Was she was like, Seth Rogen, but she also has a crush on Charlize Theron, so that worked for both of
Fair.
us. And
Yes.
Seth Rogen doesn't play quite the same giggling pothead character he always plays. So that was, he plays the smart version of Seth Rogen, which I really liked to
Excellent.
see. And yet there's still some laugh out loud physical humor and a lot of well delivered snappy dialogue, and it ended up being a lot better than I expected. So I went in very skeptical. Okay, I'm going to be, rom-coms normally aren't my thing anyway, and I was like but this one ends up being very, very funny. So yeah, check out Long Shot. It is worth your time.
Awesome. I mean, I'm not surprised that Crystal has good taste. So
Yes. Well, and Charlize, do you know Charlize Theron is, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. So is it Theron? I'm not sure.
I'm
She is
singing here for the
I've only
podcast.
read about her, but she is a full-on genius. Her IQ is like 140 something. She's brilliant. And that comes through when you, I mean, in all of her acting, you're like, this
Yeah.
person is, there's a lot more going on behind the eyeballs than a lot of the other actors around her. Like she is really thinking, and so I love seeing her work. She is
Awesome.
fantastic. And she does a great job in this of playing this character who is trying to break out of this very stiff shell. She plays the Secretary of State who's considering a run for the presidency, and she's,
Yeah.
very type A and very hyper focused. And Seth Rogen is the fun guy who kind of comes into her life and teaches her to have fun.
Yeah.
And you can see that she is thinking 3 steps ahead. And yet he doesn't play it as the dumb fun guy, which I appreciated, that she's not like, oh, to break out of my life, I need to find an idiot. She's, he is smart and, interesting. And so make their pairing makes sense, which is something that doesn't always happen in Hollywood. So I like
Awesome.
seeing
Okay,
that.
well, I'll add it to my list. It sounds really good.
So what about in the news? What has been getting your attention?
Well, I guess speaking of politics and the presidency, I was I had to take a little break from already writing to do a little dance party when the Respect for Marriage Act was signed, which I guess it may have been a slightly bit over a week since the time of this recording. But anyway, it's quite recent news and just really beautiful to see that there's a step towards additional protection for LGBTQIA plus people and families here in the US. I mean, obviously it
It's
doesn't mean
incremental,
the fight is
right?
over, but it's one more step, and it's also really just heartening to have an administration that cares. So
Right. Well, and seeing the thing that was the best for me was, the kind of testimonials of couples who were saying, this is what this brings to our family. We feel more comfortable now. And
yeah.
so that was so wonderful to see. And then my favorite was, did you see Cyndi Lauper at the White House press briefing?
No, I missed this. I heard about it. Tell me
He
more.
got up to the podium, which is unusual. Normally they don't call anybody up to the podium other than the press secretary or the president. And instead it was Cyndi Lauper. And Cyndi Lauper is like the most adorable human being in ever. Like she's just, like everything about her is, she was just great. And she talked about how important this was for her family. And so that was a really cool moment. So yeah, I loved that as well. That was it's a nice change of pace to have good news. I was like, this is really great. A civil rights victory that we get to experience.
Yes.
So
Yes,
cool.
it is. It is, we're due.
Yes. Well, and that was, my my story is the flip side, which was the major announcement this week. I don't know if you saw this, but former President Trump declared on, I can't remember which day it was last week, that he had this major announcement coming.
Yeah.
So here's this person who is an announced presidential candidate of one of our 2 major parties announcing a major announcement. So everybody was, on the edge of their seat. What is he gonna? Is it a policy proposal? What is he gonna announce? Is it, what crazy racist thing is he gonna say? Like, I mean, it was. I was genuinely curious about where this was going to go. And he announced he was selling NFTs, and they're $99 pretend trading cards. And then Crystal was telling me yesterday, it turns out they just stole them offline. And so they, even on some of them, they're still watermarks. They used like iStock photos. So somebody out there has paid $99 for a stolen picture that is this goofy picture of like Trump dressed up as an astronaut and dressed up as a baseball player, and it's all the kinds of professions that a kindergartner would think someday this is what I'm going to be. And here is a man who was the president of the United States. It's so absurd that, you know, we're just going, satire is dead. Like, there's no way to even do this. Like, this is the dumbest thing I have ever heard, and it actually took place, and so I have been getting a huge kick out of watching his fans. You know, once you're in the cult, you have to say everything he does is right. You know, you can't say, oh well, this thing's really really stupid, because it all falls down really fast. And they were trying to defend this, and it's just, how do you say this was really the best use of a presidential candidate's time?
Yeah, the comedy really does write itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel sorry for people who are like, oh, how do I mock this guy? You know, by satirizing him, he may do it tomorrow. Like, there's nothing you could say that would be, you know, more absurd. So that's that amused me this last week.
Definitely. It is definitely one of those like truth is stranger than fiction type things. Whenever he sort of shows up, I mean, maybe he's the epitome of Florida man.
Well, and I'm, you know, I've got a friend who's a history teacher who has this really phenomenal rebuttal to the great man of history theory, which, so the great man of history theory is the way we were taught history. And, you know, it's, you know, if we just study this individual and this individual, all white men who won these battles, then we'll understand history. Right. And he says we need to totally flip it and recognize all of these people as individuals were replaceable. That what really is happening is these forces put these people into place, and we need to study those forces. And so his theory is not, you know, it countermands that kind of thing, you know, oh, if we just could have killed Hitler. And he's like, somebody else would have been Hitler. Like, there were the social conditions were there to create this. And so we clearly had the social conditions, you know, from 40 years of Reaganomics and you know, a rejection of the Browning of America, you know, and then President Obama, and, you know, this reaction that I did not predict. I admit, as a privileged white person, I did not foresee how much antipathy there would be to a black leader. And then the conditions were ripe for the most cartoonish, absurd leadership, you know, but people wanted to burn it down. And you saw it on left and right. You know, the left side was burn it down with Bernie, and, you know, let's destroy everything, let's blow it up, and who cares whether or not somebody can actually win. Like, that was less important because people were so angry. And I understand where that comes from. I feel that, but gosh, the, you know, lack of pragmatism. Pragmatism is what went out the window, and it was, who cares what this person actually accomplishes? And then on the right wing, it was, this person expresses my anger, and irritates the people I want to irritate, regardless of whether or not it makes any sense for me. And like, watching it, it was just wild and scary, and now it has become farce. And yet, can we keep it farce, or are we going to be right back there? Like, I don't know if the social conditions have changed enough. So,
well, it's interesting you're talking about sort of these cults of personality and how they can wane. Like, because I keep seeing people talk about, oh, he's kind of being ousted by, Fox or whatever. They're making way for DeSantis. I mean, you're right. Like, there is always another face. So yeah, it really speaks more to just the ethos of the US at this point, and where we are as a people.
Yeah. Well, and at one point, I'm not sure who made this point first. It might have been David Plotz over at, he's not on Slate, but he's on the Slate Political Gab Fest. Might have been the first place I heard this, but that we may look back and say we were really lucky that it was Trump and not a smart version. That he was so incompetent, so inept in office. The things he wanted to accomplish were so terrifying, and yet things like the Muslim ban, he botched it, and that could have worked. That the American people would have probably tolerated it, and yet because he screwed it up in court, that fell apart. Or Which is not to say that there weren't a lot of people really harmed by really awful, awful things that happened, but it could have been worse. And the one that I find most striking is if he had, rather than sided with McConnell on the second round of stimulus during COVID, if he'd said, no, this is my time to buck my party, I'm about to go into an election, and sent people a second check, that probably would have been enough. Like, you think we're that close to the line that we really could be experiencing a second term, and yet and this reinforces my friend Frank's theory, the forces around him were such that he couldn't totally buck the party and do that. As much as he terrifies them all, he couldn't say, no way, we're going to send everybody a second check so I get elected. But
Yeah.
that scares me to think how close we came.
I love dystopians, but I haven't had much of an appetite for them in the last few years, I admit.
Oh my gosh, yes. So I wrote a dystopia back in, oh gosh, when did that one come out? 2015, I believe. That was my dystopia.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, and then there were students who were saying, you need to write the sequel. I really enjoyed this, write the sequel. And I couldn't put myself in that headspace in the time of Trump, because the plan for it was, okay, in the sequel, the world will get worse. And the world we were living in was already worse than my conceived sequel. And I was like, it's moving too fast. I can't write a world. The premise of the first one is, what if all the corporations came together and created these schools, and the schools are oppressive? But oppression is hard to define, right? And so the kind of oppression that they were experiencing, I thought was really terrible. And the premise of the second book was going to be the corporation, now the students go off to college, and one of them ends up at a university where they are teaching students how to be torturers. And I thought, oh, that would be, we need to reflect on how much we tolerated torture in the Bush administration, so we never go back to that. And before I could even write the book, I had Trump on my TV saying we need to go back to torture. And I was like,
it sounds to me like it's really timely, but also like you have to take care of your own like well-being in this process as a writer,
and not try and say this could be. I need to spend all that mental energy trying to envision something that's more nightmarish. If when I was during the 2016 election, I was saying to people, I am genuinely worried about concentration camps. Like, I think it will get to that point. And so many people were saying to me, oh, it'll never. Never.
Well, it's already happened here.
We're building them. We were building concentration camps on the southern border. And then they would say, well, no, but we're building them. So they're not concentration camps. They don't count as concentration camps if we build hastily made locations where we concentrate a bunch of people because of a single characteristic that they possess. And I was like,
that's a Japanese American.
Yeah, that is the dictionary definition of a concentration camp. We built those, and so to be able to say, I'm worried about this, and then have it happen that soon, I was like, I can't be writing.
You're like, did I do this?
I know. Well, have you ever heard the story of Stephen King's The Running Man? Have you ever read that book?
No, I haven't read the book.
So me neither. And the film with Arnold Schwarzenegger came out when we were kids, and in the end, he defeats the bad guy, and it's a happy ending. Right. That book is one of the Bachman books, which were the books that King wrote when he was going through his I believe it was withdrawal and cleaning himself up, but they're incredibly depressing, and they're all tragic in the endings. And the end of that book, which I think came out in the early 80s, maybe 83, something like that.
Spoilers don't count because it's been out for
decades. Yes, it's been out since 1983. So if somebody hasn't read it, I'm about to ruin it for you. But the protagonist steals a 747 and runs it into a skyscraper.
Ooh.
Can you imagine then being Stephen King, 20 years later going, oh my gosh, I was writing the worst thing that I could imagine, and also writing it with the heroic character in the cockpit, and then having that happen in our world. Wow. I mean,
I just got shivers.
Yeah, right. Like, it makes you go, maybe I'll write fantasy.
There's a trend right now, right, of like cozy fantasies, like legends and lattes and all of this. And it's like, I can kind of get it, we all just need low stakes right now.
Yes. Well, I've been working hard on my own sequel, and it's monsters, vampires, werewolves, like I don't worry too much that that's going to happen. It might be discussed in a Georgia election, but it's not actually going to exist. So hopefully.
You
So
better not get sued.
outside of the news, what else has been keeping you occupied? What about hobbies?
Yeah, lately, I don't know if it's like hearing all the Christmas music or things like that, but I've been getting back into playing music. So I from childhood have played piano and cello. So I've been brushing up on those a bit. Although both are unfortunately in a bit of need of repair. So,
And
it's making me a
expensive to
little bit,
repair.
yeah, yes. And also the cello, like, you have to really trust the person who's repairing it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and if you want to get on their calendar, it's sometimes a bit of a wait. So, but yeah, I also have a couple other instruments that I'm still sort of like slowly learning that I've had for a little while. So I have a hammer, dulcimer, and a mandolin. Basically, like if it has strings, I'm in.
And the
Uh,
hammer dulcimer is such a cool instrument. I love, and I wish it were used in more forms. Like you hear it in bluegrass and not enough. It's a beautiful instrument. So
yeah, I mean, I'm
although
pleased
I'm
to.
sure you could do, I'm sure that really wonderful Christmas music with it, but that's a beautiful instrument.
It's fun. Yeah, I got it for a birthday a few years ago. My birthday is like a month before Christmas. So that's kind of like what I started learning was Christmas tunes on it. But you're right, it has versatility that I think is underutilized. It is a little bit of a pain. So a lot of people don't even probably know what it is, but it has like a bajillion strings that you have to tune individually, and they're all like double strung. I don't know the technical term for that, but it's like two strings that are the same pitch to give it more resonance.
Mm.
And so it's like it's so exhausting
Well,
basically
it's
to
you've
tune
got a
it.
piano on your lap, like it's the guts of a piano,
Yeah,
and you're the
yeah,
one playing it with, and so
that's
it's a
exactly right.
complex instrument. And did your piano playing or your cello playing lead, which were more helpful in learning that? Because it really is. I mean, I think of it as more like a piano, only with instead of a keyboard, you've got the hammers, but you
It
are,
is.
you know,
Yes, you're right. It is like functionally a lot like a piano. Um, because you're hammering. I mean, but the difference, the way that cello helps me is um on a cello, you can play a tune in G and you're on the G string. And then let's say you want to pop it up to D. So you just play the same fingering on the D string. You can kind of do that on the hammer dulcimer. So it's set up in octaves that are laid out across different bridges. And so it allows you to play in whatever key you want and you pop around that way. So they both kind of contributed to me learning this instrument in weird ways.
yeah. Last week I was talking to Evan Morgan Williams. I am not musically talented. I sing and occasionally, play the harmonica. That's
I
about
mean,
it.
that
But he's
sounds
the
musically
harmonica.
talented to me.
Yeah, yeah. No, but compared to people like you who are, play multiple, my brother plays piano, drums, saxophone. I mean, and because of saxophone, the reed instruments, he does any reed instrument basically. And
Wow.
so he can he's one of those people who can just pick up an instrument and noodle with it long enough and he gets good, and I envy that. But I was
Yeah,
talking to Evan Morgan Williams last week, who plays the harmonica, and the harmonica is similar in that you choose the harmonica by key, and so
right.
you can't mess up as much. Like it's a
Yeah,
little safer if you're in the right key. You're probably going to hit a note that will sound decent with accompaniment. Are you playing on your own, or are you playing with yeah, any other accompaniment?
mostly on my own, just because I need to practice. But recently I've met some folks who love to play. So
Oh,
we
cool.
have plans to noodle around together a bit more. But yeah, I actually really love playing in ensembles. I never feel like I'm so low quality, but I love like finding the harmony and just yeah, making music with others. So that's my goal, is to get to that point for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, well, and
Yeah,
then you bring in that dynamic of getting together with these other folks, which, that adds a layer that makes it even more rewarding, I think, you know.
Yes, absolutely. Like that
Um,
creativity comes together. And like little known fact maybe about me is that I used to be in a Celtic band. So like I do love that. I love the just bouncing off of each other and
was it
having a lot of
mandolin or was it cello? What were you playing
It
in the
was
band?
actually with cello, which is unusual. Like Celtic music typically is very like heavy on the treble.
Yeah,
Yeah,
high.
it's high. And so it was just this like,
Yeah.
crazy like aspect of it. And it was a lot of fun, honestly. We
You
would
were
play it like
bringing the
Renaissance
kind of Norse
festivals.
heavy metal side of Celtic, into it.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh, I wish it were that cool.
I think it sounds pretty cool, Celtic with cello. That's an improvement.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, but how about you?
well, I have been super swamped with publishing company stuff and edits of my next novel. But one
Yay!
thing that did kind of pull me away from that in a really healthy way was that a friend of mine, we've only met a handful of times, like, but because she's super cool, I'm like, I want, to call her my friend. Amy Baskin, she's a prof at Lewis and Clark University, and she was nominated for a pushcart, which is one of the biggest deal prizes you can win in the poetry literary world. And so that made me say, I need to catch up on a lot more of her poetry. And so I went, took some time away from my own work to say, I need to read her stuff. And that was very rewarding. So would you mind if I share a poem or two of hers?
Please do. Please do. I would love to hear it. And congrats to Amy if you listen to this.
Yes, I mean, you will see, well deserved. So this is one of the ones that I really enjoyed. Seesaws and Other Perils. Kick and push, spin as fast as we can. We laugh, we're never getting off. We're always getting off on cuts and scrapes, our rough and tumble play, wandering alone, unsupervised, hanging our heads over the sides, our knuckles scrape asphalt. We pull bark chips from our hair, find new ways to scrape our knees. We laugh ourselves silly until our sides cramp, and then we laugh some more. We will never stop the ride, only fools jump off and stay off. What causes dizziness in adults? Why could we once spin for hours? Now we huddle in the middle so we won't get as sick. Is it more neurological or psychological? This fear of being harmed, this going round in circles hurts more than the broken arms, the cuts, the late nights out with music under the spinning stars, replaced by the reassurance of steady early bird specials. When the tall metal slides are replaced with short plastic and seesaws and other perils are removed, it's the end of 10-foot high jungle gyms. We will refuse to let them take our merry-go-round. We will stay on. When do some lose their ability to spin endlessly? Eustachian tubes gape open from swallowing and holding back tears. We equalize the pressure. We hold hands across the divide, refusing to jump. Bodies pulled outwards away from each other. Centrifugal force goads us to separate, get off in opposing directions. It is stubborn or resilient to refuse, to let go. Again. Let's do it again. Only fools stay on and still get off.
It was amazing. I got
Isn't
chills.
that cool?
It was so good.
There's and do I encourage folks, look it up and see it, because there are so many lines where you want to just take some time with 2 or 3 lines of it and go, oh, that's really good. The way
I
she is so thoughtful about the way that they're constructed.
Yes, I mean I love, I'm sort of reading along here with you. I love how the lack of punctuation just makes it feel breathless, but the breathlessness changes context as it goes through. That's just so cool. And it reminds me of it reminds me a little bit of this moment in my childhood. I mean, late childhood. So I grew up in North Carolina, sort of closer to the mountains, and we would get snows, sometimes big snows in the winter. And we had a bit of a hilly backyard, and so I would get one of those sleds that was just like a circle, a
Yep.
disc. And I would put it at the top of the hill, and I'd back up and I'd run forward and I'd jump on it and go pop, 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 pop down the hill, down the terraces, and just have the best time. And then we had a number of winters without snow. And finally, I was probably, I don't know, 12, 13, something like that. And it snowed. And I was like, here we go. And I got I got the sled out and I put it at the top of the hill and I backed up and I ran towards it. And then I screeched to a stop and I was like, I'm gonna bust my kneecaps.
Yep.
I think I just became an adult.
Yep. That's, yeah, it hits you fast when you
Yeah.
this will hurt now. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's I used to play basketball a lot through high school, never well, but pick up basketball with friends. And so I was invited to play ball with some friends from some of my colleagues from work, and went out there, and years had gone, like a decade had gone by since the last time I'd played any actual basketball. I was probably in my early 30s, and no problem. We went out there, we played, we shot around, it was fine. And the next day I was so sore, and I was like, oh, I'm an old man now. Like,
Yeah.
I have to warm up and stretch and things that I never even would have considered when I was playing pickup ball in high school. Like, yeah, the knees catch up with
The
us.
knees. That's what it is. It's the knees.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, that's beautiful. Congrats to Amy. I'm gonna definitely check out more for poetry.
Yeah, she's very, very talented. And the thing that so often I want to read more of her prose as well, because one of the things that I find is people who are that thoughtful about wording often make excellent prose writers. The person who comes to mind for me is Margaret Atwood.
Yeah.
I suspect Margaret Atwood, if you cornered her, she would admit she probably thinks of herself more as a poet than as a novelist. And I can read that in her books. Like, she is really thinking about, how does this sentence sound with this next one? What if I changed this particular word? And so I try and bring that into my own prose writing. How can I be
Yeah.
that thoughtful and careful about language? But I admire Ursula K. Le Guin, same thing. Ursula K. Le Guin loved poetry and did publish some poetry. And I think it informs her prose. So I've tried to
Yeah.
teach my students in creative writing, like, we don't just write poetry to write poetry. We write poetry to learn to care about words.
Right. Right. I mean, you're very excellent at that. I feel less excellent at that.
Oh no, see, I think your prose is really high quality. And the trick is, you don't want to be thinking so much about it that it detracts from the story. And so how do you
Right.
pull people through the story? I think you've got a real talent for pacing, so that the story is propulsive. And I love that about your writing. And
Well, I appreciate
that's
it.
that's a skill, to say, how am I going to control how fast this reader is reading so that the story gets faster and faster and faster.
Yeah. I would like to think more about specific word choice. Like every now and then I'll come up with something descriptive that I'm like, oh, that was nice. But usually I'm just like, what does he say? He said this. That's what he said. Okay, great. That makes sense with this character and moves the plot. Great.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the Unrelenting is plot heavy. Like, it's
Yes.
what's going to
Very.
happen next kind of story, which works really well in terms of the way the characterization. Oh, no, I'm talking about writing. Shouldn't
Oh
be doing
yeah.
that. Writer's not writing. Um,
We're not reading.
you can
We're
see
not
how
reading.
easily
But
viewers can
wait,
see, this is how we slip into this. Like, as soon as oh, I'm watching this movie now, I'm thinking about how to write. Like, it's
okay, but I do want to say one thing about writing, which is that the winter solstice is coming and there's something special planned for that.
yes, well, thank you. We should tell folks. So we, through Not a Pipe Publishing, have been doing this fundraiser through the Alzheimer's Association for, I'm going to say, 4 or 5 years now, where we write all day on the longest day. And so groups come together. The Alzheimer's Association has created this fundraiser where on the summer solstice, people will knit all day long, or they will do marathons, or whatever it is that they do. They'll do it from dawn till dusk to kind of explore that concept of sundowning, which people with Alzheimer's experience. And so we started the first few years just doing it on the summer solstice, and we would start at dawn and write until dusk. And that's a 16-hour writing. That's a long time to write. It's very challenging on the longest day. And then, and this idea came about via the Alzheimer's Association too. They suggested kind of jumpstarting your fundraising on the shortest day. And that's a great practice. So our dress rehearsal on the winter solstice, which is coming up soon, Wednesday of this week, we will be writing from dawn until dusk, which is far more tolerable on the shortest day. It's very doable, and I know not everybody has the flexibility in their schedule to say, oh, I'm going to take a day off of work. So some people will do it on a Saturday or whatever. But if you are interested in joining our team, the team is called Writing Against the Darkness, and folks out there can sign up, and the Alzheimer's Association handles the fundraising side. All you have to do is say to your kind of family and friends, hey, would you like to donate? Here's a button to click. I'm going to be writing all day. And then the Alzheimer's Association handles all of that. But yeah, that's coming up soon. Are you going to be able to do that with us this year?
So unfortunately, that's a work day for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really fun. And I've sort of done it on alternative days before, because it feels like for the last few years that it just keeps being the middle of the week. So it's really challenging.
Yeah.
So,
One
you
year it
know,
was
I'm
on
waiting.
the summer solstice was on Father's Day, and that really impacted who could participate. And
Yeah,
so
for sure, for sure. But you don't have to write all day to donate.
no,
So that's what I've done before, and just sort of given moral support. And I have like a very lovely mug from the Alzheimer's Association. It's actually like great. I
yeah,
should be
yeah, they
using it
send you
more
nice swag.
often. I do.
But and for folks who want to participate, but I think the idea of writing all day scares some people. We take a lot of breaks. Like, this is not intense. This is not overwhelming. It's fun. The only thing that kind of creates that team atmosphere is that we do a Zoom call. So everybody touches base a few times during the mid-morning, lunch, mid-afternoon, evening, to kind of say, how's it coming? And then people who are interested share their work at the end of the day. Once the sun goes down, we kind of celebrate and collect our word count, and then people share out. But otherwise, it's just time to write and be with other writers and raise money for. This is one of the things that's really cool. The Alzheimer's Association invests in research, but also directly supports care for families, resources for families. And that's the part that I really like. There are a lot of these organizations that just do research, which is vitally important. It would be wonderful to find a cure for, breast cancer, find a cure for this disease, find a cure for that disease. But it's difficult to allocate those funds in a way that helps people if the cure is not found. And sometimes the funds get misallocated because we are investing so much in, breast cancer research, and really what might make the difference is studying this other kind of cancer, but those funds have now been earmarked. And so this one, I appreciate the fact that they are walking and chewing gum at the same time, and they're really helping families out, because people who are the caregivers for people with Alzheimer's, that's a lot to take on. And so those folks need all that support. So if that's something that you are interested in supporting, any of our listeners or viewers, please jump in there, join the team. The more the merrier. And certainly find somebody on the team that you want to contribute to, because they would love to have your numbers in their numbers as well. So Writing Against the Darkness via the Alzheimer's Association. Okay, that brings us to our ad. I haven't even mentioned Doug. He's sitting here so patiently. So Doug, the producer, quiet guy, as I mentioned before in the intro. And so Doug's going to fire up our ad music. We don't have an advertiser yet, although our numbers are getting to the point where I'm thinking maybe we should start, seeing if folks want to advertise on the show. But for now, we're still practicing advertising. And so Doug, fire up the music, and Marie gave me the idea for this ad, so here is our ad for today. iRobot, the company that brought you the Roomba vacuum cleaning robot, is proud to announce their newest time-saving robot helper for your household, the Pumbaa. Instead of navigating your whole house with a complex algorithm, this robot uses a series of advanced sensors to detect and follow your dogs around the backyard, ready and waiting to clean up after them. Then it disposes of the dog's waste so you don't have to. And here's the feature that makes the Pumbaa so special. It can detect when your dogs are squatting, and it pulls away from them and turns 90 degrees to give them some privacy. That's really essential for your dog's mental well-being and digestive health, because they do not like anyone to watch them while they do their business, even a robot. Warning: the Pumbaa is not designed for cat owners. If it follows cats to their litter boxes, even when it tries to give them space, they simply refuse and choose to go elsewhere. Also, in rare instances, cats have been known to train the Pumbaa to bring their owners the Pumbaa's results as little presents. So get yourself or your loved one a Pumbaa today, so they will never have to clean up after their dog again. Your results may vary. Some dogs mistake the Pumbaa for a toy, and that can lead to its destruction, or much worse if it's already full, so make sure the Pumbaa is supervised by a human. iRobot is not responsible for damage to your yard, to dogs who try to eat it, to children who try to hide it, or to neighbors' yards if that's where you program your Pumbaa to relocate the waste. I'm sorry about that, Doug. That's going to be some editing challenges there, but Doug's amazing. He'll make it sound decent. Yeah, Doug is...
I really need the Pumbaa.
I owe Doug a lot of thanks for clipping everything to make it sound good. So thank you, Doug, for all of your work.
Doug's a pro, but I'm sad that Doug can't unfortunately have the Pumbaa, because doesn't Doug have a lot of kitty cats?
Doug's got 9 cats.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, Doug gave me a list. I've got somewhere here of the cats' names, because they're very creative and literary. Well, Poops and Giggles isn't. That was the one that I learned about first, was Poops and Giggles, which I do think is funny. That one's edited for YouTube. It is not actually called Poops and Giggles. But let's see if I can find his list here. There was Moore Christopher, after Christopher Moore. I thought that was clever. Virginia Cat, who actually stays in her room, which I thought was clever. So yeah, Doug, that's a good bit. But yes, Doug's got lots. Doug is a very sweet. Is it okay to say you're shy? I think it's a safe thing to say. Doug is a shy person. He's got, he's behind the glass there, and but he does a ton of work to make this sound decent. So
some people
thank
are
you
just
for everything.
more comfortable behind the scenes, and that is where his strengths lie.
That absolutely, and with his, 9 cats, that's a lot of work in and of itself.
It is. It's very
Some
generous.
of the cats
also helps here.
Yeah, some of them chose him, some, walked in, and then some of them, once you get the reputation as the person who takes care of cats, then people are like, I need to get rid of this cat. And Doug's like, yep, I'll take another cat. So Doug's, 9 cats. It's a lot of cats. Okay, so our next segment is haiku. Now, this happened initially. The idea was that we would share like a word or a single prompt, and then one of our listeners, Kelly, who writes at Phoenix Lily 245 on Twitter, suggested haiku instead, which makes a lot more sense. It works a lot better. So, do you have a haiku you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Sure. This is inspired by real life chilly temperatures here in Albuquerque. A lot of people do not realize that Albuquerque gets cold in the winter. Yes, a lot of people, I think, just sort of think it's Phoenix, basically, and that it's always balmy. But we are basically at the same elevation as Denver, just a little bit lower in latitude. So similar weather, just a little bit
I didn't realize it was that high up. Wow.
Yeah, I think technically we're a little higher.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and you're far enough from the, it's Plains states, in terms of where it is in the country, and mountains in terms of elevation. So you put those together, you're getting cold winters.
Yes, there's a 10,000 plus foot mountain like in town. So
what's the temperature now? You mentioned it earlier. What
let's see. It looks like right now it's 28. And a little bit
28.
Yes, it's warmed up. So that's what my computer says. Who knows how accurate that is, but okay, so here's my Albuquerque haiku. This is inspired by true events. Curtains on windows, towels rolled under door frames. Snow tonight. Bring it.
Prepared. I like that. Bring it. Yes, that is good. But yes, that towels rolled under door frames, that's real. Like, that's where you're going. Anytime the tiniest bit of air that gets in, I'm going to be feeling it.
It's true. And also part of this is because I have a dog who has separation anxiety, and yesterday he ripped off the what's it called, weather stripping.
Oh, that's weather stripping.
Yeah, he just like removed that from the front door, so the towel is there until I can go to the hardware store and get a new piece.
Yeah. And like, of all the times to remove the weather stripping, this is not the season for that. Can you do that in the summer?
Yes.
How hot does it get there in the summer?
there's usually a couple of days where it'll hit 3 digits Fahrenheit, but not much. It pretty much hangs out in the 90s in the worst part of the summer. And I say worst because I'm not a summer person. Uh,
That's us too. I mean, August we get up into the 90s and hundreds, and but
yeah,
it's about 3-4 weeks. So
right.
whereas our winters are a lot more mild. Right now I'm all bundled up and freezing, and it's probably in the high 30s. I just
Yeah, I
don't
mean,
have.
it's legitimately chilly.
It's
So
chilly, but I also the things that a human body requires to generate and maintain heat are muscle and fat, and I lack both those. So I am always just so cold. My hands and feet are always so cold. So yeah, this even the 30s. And my family, we're gonna go to New York City for New Year's. And it may be really cold on New Year's Eve in Times
yes,
Square. So we're trying to prepare ourselves. But
maybe, well, hopefully there'll be at least some body heat.
yes, yeah, we'll be packed in tightly enough. And some
Yeah.
years it's fine. I mean, I'm looking on the weather forecast, and they're like, oh yeah, it's in the mid 30s right now in New York City too. So it might not be bad, but we are weather wimps, and so if we get a blizzard, we are not going to be prepared. So we'll
Good
see.
luck. Godspeed.
Yeah. So we do have a couple of haiku contributed by listeners as well. One from a former guest, Karen Eisenbray, one of the authors that Maria and I both know,
Yes.
writes, I'm not a poet. Meter and rhyme elude me. I can't write haiku. And I counted it out. It is a haiku. So apparently the irony is that it is a perfectly accurate haiku. And then Kelly, who recommended this segment, Phoenix Lily 245, who came up with the idea. This was hers. Overthinking mind, chaotic, soothing routine, poetry's balance.
Love it.
I like that a lot. Evan Morgan Williams, who was on last week, was telling me that the last line, or it's the last word of a haiku. There's apparently a word in Japanese for that called the cutting word. And so if that pivots on that last word, it's a word that's supposed to have more power. So I like the idea of the first two lines juxtaposed and then poetry's balance. Those nicely done, Kelly. And mine for the week is less serious. Podcast hosting is a new gig, Doug. I promise. I'll get better. Working on the ums and uhs.
Doug. I
Yes.
love it.
Apologize. So there's a little gift for you, Doug. Okay, so your next book, I will not, as a publisher, be hectoring you too much to finish it promptly, but it won't be coming out too soon. So in the meantime, what's something that our listeners can be doing to support you, to follow you? What you're up to these days?
So during November for NaNoWriMo, I focused a lot of my non-working time on solo book that I'm working on right now. So if anybody does want to support that, I would love to have them join my email list because I will tell them about it and I can send them like the first chapter if they want to read it. But it's so if anyone was listening earlier when we were talking about Shadow and Bone or Six of Crows, then this may be for you. It's a secondary world fantasy heist, and I'm having so much fun writing the book. Although I don't quite know if I'm smart enough to write a heist, so I'm hoping that in revisions the smarts will come to me.
I am so 100% with you. So my most recent manuscript, which I sent off to my editors today, like this is present, but but the second half of it ends up being a heist story, and I had never written anything like that, and it's a lot more note taking, a lot more, like you feel like you're the either psychopath or detective in the
Yes.
series. Got the pin board, like how am I going to make this thing work? But it's fun. The intricacy is challenging, but I think it's enjoyable to try and figure out how am I going to make this work, and then very intentionally not work. Like here's their great plan, and here's the wrinkle that is going to prevent that plan from working, and how are these characters going to manage to survive the situation when the plans all fall apart. So I enjoyed writing a heist, but did you do any particular research? I mean, other than reading other good heist novels, how did you think about that process of learning about how to write a heist?
Yes. So I think there was some kind of like divine timing on this because I started writing it a while ago. I've been working on this for, I know this show is not about writing. Please indulge me, sorry.
It's okay. We can't escape it, even if we try.
Um, so I started working on it a couple of years ago, and I was really running into that. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I then this just magical, I guess it was a tweet at the time, from Mary Robinette Kowal, just amazing, Hugo Award winner, Nebula Award winner, Locus Award winner. She's like, hey, I'm teaching a class on how to write heists. You want to come join? And I was like, yes, I do.
Very cool.
So I attended the class, and I'll put a plug in for her Patreon because you get to go to writing classes through her Patreon at a certain tier. So highly recommended. So that really helped me. And I think the thing that really like clicked for me is something she said during that class, which is that there are certain genres that are there are expected beats, like in a romance, there's expected beats. In a heist, there's expected beats.
Absolutely.
In a mystery, whatever. I'd never written any of those things before. I'd just written fantasy, which is nebulous and can be any type of story. It's literally just the setting and the magical elements, or like whatever. There's certain elements that are hallmarks of fantasy. Not all of them have to be there all the time, but and so I was like, oh, this is actually easier because there are beats to follow that, thanks to Mary Robinette, I now know.
Yes. Well, yeah,
cool.
that how long was the course, like one class or a single class, or was it?
It was one class and it was just on the beats, which is
Yeah.
exactly what I needed.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. I
Mhm.
attended a class from Eric Witchy, who's somebody else that I would recommend folks check out, and he does wonderful master's classes, as well as I actually don't know. I was about to say I'm sure he does stuff for beginners as well, but I'm not sure about that. But
Yeah,
his classes are really excellent, and he did one on mystery in other genres, and it was,
lovely.
it was eye-opening to me, like, oh yeah, and his one of his points was every story is a mystery story. What is it your character doesn't know that they need to figure out over the course of this book or whatever it is you're writing? And that was really helpful to me. I was writing the YA dystopia at the time, and realizing, oh, this story that I think of as, how do I share this dystopic world, that there's not enough energy there. But if it becomes a mystery within that, how does my character learn what's going on in this world, and how is it a mystery for her? That's what created the propulsive energy for the story. And so
That's cool.
the same thing, fantasy stories always, I shouldn't say always, but so often lend themselves to quests. And there's nothing wrong with the quest, but doing the heist, plugging things in like a romance within the quest, or a heist within the quest, helps, because quests can get rangy, where it becomes wandering. And I don't want the reader to ever feel like, and they're off for something, and there's no sense that they need to get it in any kind of particular time. And like the heist is, it's got to happen in this way or they're going to get caught. And so the stakes are immediate and fun. And
Yes, I'm having a real blast with it. So thank you for indulging me and talking
well,
about
and
writing
and
for a
I
little
did
bit.
have a question about that.
Oh,
You talked about it being second world fantasy, and I was like,
yeah.
that's not a phrase I was familiar with. I had to look it up when I
Mm,
first heard that. What do you mean by second world fantasy?
yeah, uh so second world, so I guess what might be easier is something like Unrelenting is set in the modern world, and there just happen to be fantastical elements, and that makes it a fantasy. You see a lot of, I'm trying to think of examples, and there's like a bajillion, and my brain is just out of my head right now. But secondary world, I guess the one that everybody probably is most familiar with is like Lord of the Rings, right? Where it's like it's its own world, with its own people and countries and
Okay.
laws and magic and whatever. And it's like, or Game of Thrones or whatever, like whatever it is, it's like, okay, well, I don't think have dragons right here,
Yes.
but
So this is,
there
so
are.
when you say second world, you're talking the terms I would use for that distinction are epic versus portal, right? So, portal fantasy is Narnia, like it's our world and also this other world. And portal fantasy has some real advantages for the writer because a character from our world can say, and this thing looked like a whatever.
Yeah,
And because they're from our world, they can describe that. And if you really lean into what you would call secondary world, the characters can't say, and the car looked like a Studebaker because there are no Studebakers, or
correct.
the dragon was roughly the size of a Mack truck. There are no Mack trucks, so that it is very. Who does that really well is Miko Azul.
Oh, yes.
She doesn't even have, there aren't chickens because chickens are things that exist in our world. There are these other kinds of small fowl that people eat, but they have their own names because
Right.
they're not chickens, because there's nothing from our world in this world. And she does a really great job of that without losing the reader entirely. I mean, it's a challenge because you don't want the reader to have to go, I have to learn so much about this world that I've lost the story. So you piece out those pieces of information, and her series does that really well, where things come back so that you're like, oh, I do remember that this animal that was a variation on a chicken without ever being referred to as a chicken is now the thing they're chasing or eating or whatever later seeing, and therefore it was good that I remembered that.
Right.
But
Right. Yeah, this was a relevant detail. Yeah.
right, and deciding how much am I going to make my reader invested in this world, because if you go too much it's too hard, but if you go too little the world doesn't feel developed and real. And so yeah, that's, are you doing the tons and tons of notes thing?
Um, a bit. I'm on the fifth draft now, so at this point I kind of have it in my head. Um, but yeah, it made me think about all kinds of things, like for instance, so I'm calling it my social justice fantasy heist also because it talks a lot about like classism and racism, and so there are different groups of people, I guess. And the more able you are to fly, the higher you are in the social hierarchy. So someone who looks like you and me is like the lowest caste, essentially. And so my character's from the middle. And he has, I call them glide sheaths, but basically imagine someone base jumping or like a flying squirrel, right? But that's like part of his body where he has these flaps of skin and he can glide. And I was like, so how does he wear pants if like he can't wear something around his waist?
Right.
So I had to like rethink clothing,
Yeah, that kind
like
of,
that kind of thing really that took a lot of just critical thinking of my own world for a while. I think I've worked out a lot of the kinks on it at this point, but yeah, for a while it was like I can take nothing for granted here.
I'm envisioning those what's the weird speedo that the character that my wife, like that, it's around, it's over the neck, and then and
Yes,
that
it's
way
just like
arms
suspender
are
speedo.
free.
Yeah. I did not think about that option to be honest.
Yeah, good. It would the book suddenly took a very strange turn when we learned about the clothing he was wearing, and I could just never envision him the same way.
No, no, Lord help us. Anyway, yeah,
Now
it's
you'll
been
have to
fun.
make clear he's not wearing that. See, this is what he's wearing. It's not that.
Maybe this will be in my very own fanfic of that I
Yes.
write of my own story.
Pretty makes it, yes. How do you, yeah, that's, but you're right. It's a very real challenge. How would figuring out kind of the physics of it. The subtle knife, that series, what is it called?
Yes,
His
Philip
Dark Materials.
Pullman is his name, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got it. Well, that's right. Philip Pullman's, yeah. He's got this world that and that one's very much Portal, but the character at one point goes to this world where there are these creatures that have evolved. This is not a spoiler for those of you. Well, it is for those of you who haven't read it, but it's
But
really
also,
cool
this
when
book
you
has
get.
been out for decades.
It's been out for, yeah, 20 years. But the characters have evolved. These sentient characters have evolved to hold on to like essentially coconuts, and the lava flows in their world are very flat, which are like roads, and they have evolved with these their secondary legs, arms, not sure which, on the sides, and then these other two that hold on to this thing in the front. So they're basically animals that are also like motorcycles, and they can zip around. And thinking through the physics of how would that work, how would that change their society, how would it change their, I really like that when authors take the time to think they don't have to look like us. They don't have to
Right.
be structured, but it does have ramifications. If their arms are connected to their feet, they cannot
Right.
put on a belt. you know,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. You're not going to be holstering your knife and your belt like
right?
every other
Oh yeah. Well,
fantasy
and I
thief
would
or
think in
whatever.
that society,
Yeah.
the amount that people carry becomes really relevant too. Your flyers can't
Yes.
go, oh yeah, sure, I'm carrying 40 pounds of gear or wearing a
Yeah.
suit of armor or something.
You're gonna love it.
So yeah, that's I'm looking forward to reading that. That'll be really fun.
Hopefully, I'll finish it someday.
Yes, yes. Well, that's yeah. We all got those projects where we're going, oh yeah, this is the current thing. We'll see.
Yep. Yep.
And what about other kinds of events are you doing? What's been going on that way? Because you've had some successful ones recently.
Yeah. I found a really lovely local bookstore called Tidal Wave. If you are in Albuquerque, it's the cutest name ever for a bookstore.
Yeah.
Tidal Wave. And they are so generous to offer local authors to have booths at regular events. So I've had a few. There was one for Small Business Saturday. There was one recently for around Halloween. And so that's been really fun to just get more into the community, make some friends and sell some books. Um, and then also I'm going in with a few of my other friends locally on a booth at the New Mexico Comic Con in January. So I'm very excited about that.
Yes.
I think it's going to be a blast. And if nothing else, I'll just have a fun time nerding out with everybody.
Yep.
I'm working on a costume, I'm gonna
Oh,
have
very cool. Do you want to reveal what you're going to be going as
uh
for the costume, or is that a
I'm
secret?
looking I'm looking at it over here and I'm not satisfied with it yet. So no, I don't want to reveal yet
Yep.
because I may scrap it and start over.
Well, you should see if you can get on some panels and
Yeah,
go, in costume and go share about your book, because that experience of talking to readers is so valuable. I've had folks ask me, "Oh, this looks like it's in this genre, does this happen in it?" And I
yeah.
thought, no, but it could in the sequel, or it could in something,
Yeah.
thank you. I mean, people are providing
Scribbling
you
notes.
input. Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, Comic Cons are great. And I'm talking about finding our people. Like that's one of the most fun
Yes.
things about it is you're hanging out with a bunch of other nerds. It's really
Yeah.
great. So
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
excited.
enjoy
And
that.
the other three authors that I'm sharing with locally, they're all sci-fi fantasy authors. So we all kind of have a theme there. So yeah, and in fact, two of them are also like debut authors whose first book came out this year. So yeah, it'll be a good bunch.
Well, I'm really glad you found those folks to support one another too, because one of the challenges that folks out there might not realize is when you're a debut author, you have a product to sell.
Yeah.
Just one. It's very challenging.
Yes.
And it's not even the kind of product that people who want to support you can buy repeatedly.
Right.
I
Yeah.
say it's not like having a convenience store that sells Snickers bars. It's like owning a convenience store that sells one Snickers bar.
Yeah. Although I will say the other thing that's been really great for Jesse and me is we share a Patreon. And we decided early on that, even though we probably will, over the course of our writing career, pursue plenty of separate projects outside of our collaborations, why not rise together and be able to cheer each other on through that platform? So it's very small right now, but it's recurring revenue for us. And it allows us to make a donation annually to our favorite nonprofit, Brave Trails. Going to give a shout out for them. It's a 501c3 um, like LGBTQ youth summer camp in California.
Oh, how
And it's
cool.
like so affirming and wonderful. And I just love them and their mission. Um,
Brave
but
Trail.
yes, Brave
Look that
Trails,
up.
Brave Trails. But also like, yeah, I mean, it's basically the equivalent of selling, I don't know, 3 books a month or something right now. It's tiny. And yet that's what's happening. And what we're doing in return is just giving them a short story every month, which is a lot less effort than writing a novel. A novel
It
to sell 3 copies of every month. So
it is,
yeah,
but it's
so
also good discipline for you. Like, we've got to get
great.
this story out. It
Yep,
is content. Eventually it's, hey, of all the stories we put out, we could put a bunch together. This is something that is potential content. And you're
totally.
reconnecting with those fans constantly, and that's really
Yeah,
valuable too. So
yeah.
yeah,
It's been
I encourage people, check that out. Get on the
fun.
Patreon. That's a great way to be
Oh yeah.
connecting, and you'll
There
be
are some
ready when the
deleted
sequel to
scenes.
Unrelenting comes out, which
Yes, there are some deleted scenes from Unrelenting. We even have a deleted scene from the sequel that we already trashed, but we liked it. So that's already in
nice.
there.
That's an interesting way to kind of get a teaser. Like,
Yeah,
here's something
exactly.
that won't be in the thing that you're excited about.
Hope you enjoy this scene that won't be in,
This won't be
start
it.
not
I like
appearing in
that.
this
Like,
film.
why wait for the closing credits for the outtakes? The outtakes you get first. That's
Right.
a
I'm
good idea.
sure there will be more of them.
Yes. I should look at I've got hundreds of pages of
Yeah,
notes of stuff that just, nope, that didn't fly. It didn't work. I
exactly.
was looking at a piece last night that was a total kind of kill your darlings, where I was like, I wanted to put this in so badly, and I really
Yeah.
think it's well written, and I enjoyed it, and maybe there'll be, and I was like, no, this just doesn't,
Yeah.
it's not the right voice for this
Right.
particular part of the story. I have to let it go. So yeah,
Right.
maybe I
Or like
should
a
let it
Patreon
out.
or an email newsletter, that's a great place to put that stuff so that people can still enjoy it and they just have to, just know that it's not there. But it's kind of a little sneak peek behind the
Yes.
scenes.
Well, and it's nice for folks to recognize, like, you're the real fans. You get a little more. So that's
Great.
diehards. Um, so our next segment is our weekly poll. And so we put this up on the company's Facebook, Twitter, everything, and get feedback from people. And last week we had a really interesting question from Evan Morgan Williams about what was the most responsible way to deal with a social media platform. Actually, I want to talk with you about that. So first, let's hear yours for this next week. What do you think should be our poll?
My vote is a little bit more lighthearted, a little bit more holiday cheer, but maybe not lighthearted. I don't
We'll
know.
see.
It's Elf on a Shelf, cool or creepy.
my
And
my family is Jewish, and we had I just learned today that there is a Jewish variant called Mensch on a Bench, which is pretty great. So yes, but is Elf on a
that
Shelf
one's
cool
cool.
or creepy? Yeah, that one's cool. Yeah, I don't have that one. I have a little thing that sits on the corner of a shelf that is it looks like death. It's just this like black robed character, and then at Christmas it's the Ghost of Christmas Future. So I'm being festive.
I
So I
love
have the
it.
Ghost of
That's
Christmas
excellent.
Future on my shelf. But yes, I think the concept of Elf on a Shelf needs to be part of that conversation too. The idea that this is moving around your house to let your children know they are being watched and judged all the time. Like, cool or creepy, efficacious. Yeah, so we will certainly put that one up tomorrow, and please weigh in on that. And don't just vote, it's a poll. You could just click. That's great. We love your feedback, but also, what is your reasoning? What's your rationale? That's helpful. And this last week was a good illustration of that. So our poll was, how do we responsibly respond to a social media platform becoming a dangerous place, not just for the individuals who are on it, which has always been the case on all of them, but really dangerous to society at large. And Evan and I were talking last week. He wanted it to be binary. Should we leave or should we stay? And as we discussed it, he, came around to the idea that this is a multiple choice. Like, there are more, there are different options. So we asked folks, should you leave in mass? Is that what we should all do? Say, no, this is becoming bad for our society. We're out of here. Stay and fight back. Stay, but ignore the trolls, kind of starve them for information in that space, or other. And that was interesting as well, because our results were about half the folks were saying leave in mass. And it's important to recognize we're asking people who stayed, which means of the people who are still there, half of them are saying we should have left.
I'm out soon, imminently.
Right. Yeah. Like, this is a sample size that is not a representative group from our society. The people who left aren't there to respond. Then about 38% said stay and fight back. Nobody said stay and ignore, which I found interesting because I have heard that as a potential response before, but that was not in our poll. And then some folks did say 12.5% said other. So I'm not sure what those others were. We didn't get a lot of explanation, but we got a really great one from, and this person's handle is insert profile name here, he, him, mouse emoji. So that's tweeting at L Toupe and said, personally, I carefully curate my social media spaces to be safe spaces for me. So much like an ornamental bloom, I prune regularly. And I think it's important to think about the identities of the people who are deciding about this, because if somebody is in has an identity that makes them more of a target, I think they do have, I don't want to say the right, but they get to respond in a way that keeps them safe and healthy. And that might be different from, a middle-aged cishet straight white guy. I firmly believe in fighting back because as somebody of Jewish descent, I am intimately sensitive to the fact that if you let the brown shirts take over the streets, you will regret it. And so that's something that I think about, but it would be deeply unfair for me to then say to somebody else, therefore you should do that too. Like, that's not everybody's role. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's deeply personal, the decision, and I don't think there's any wrong decision for an individual. And there have been times in my life where I am on the stay and fight back mindset of things. So I guess I'm going to liken this a little bit to where I've lived in my life. So I grew up in North Carolina, and then I lived in Texas for 10 years, both of which have similar political leanings. And so I always felt, a little in the minority in that aspect of who I was.
Yeah.
But mostly it just I felt this sense of responsibility to stay, vote, do all the things, volunteer, contribute, to trying to turn the tide, which never got turned. And then in my 30s, yeah, during the time I lived there.
Yeah, there are still people fighting in those very places
Absolutely.
right now. I want to honor
And
them.
I commend all of that, and it's highly worthy efforts. In my 30s, I moved to a blue state for the first time in my life. And I was like, I'm still voting. I'm still volunteering. I'm still getting the word out. And also, I don't feel like my rights as a woman or as a queer individual are being trampled upon. And this is really nice. And it doesn't mean I'm not still an activist. And so I think that's sort of where I'm landing right now, is just because of where I am with mental health and my current journey. I think I am sort of landing right now in the insert profile name here, he, him, mouse emoji camp of let's prune this so that I don't get necessarily distracted by not that it's a bad distraction, but like I don't fall into these conversations there, but that I'm because sometimes I do. I don't know. I feel like I'm one of those people who I love to listen. I don't lose my cool very easily. So I feel like I'm actually quite effective at talking with people with whom I do not share opinions. But like right now, I don't have the capacity for it.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm landing right now. And, maybe ask me in a year and I'll be in a totally different place. I have no idea.
Right. Well, and I'm also really sensitive to the fact that people have different roles in this fight.
Yeah.
And so somebody like you who can talk with somebody who disagrees with them and hear them and bring them around is absolutely essential. And I can also recognize that's not my gift. Like
Sure.
I do not have that. And I also recognize that my kind of preaching to the choir voice is also important. And so I will be arguing with somebody online who is a, full on far righty, and I'm not really talking to them. I do not have any expectation that I'm going to convince them that I'm going to turn, I'm engaging in that to say to other people, see, this thing that this person believes is dangerous, is harmful. And there are other people who believe differently. And maybe if you're so in their media bubble that you don't hear this enough, you need to hear that this thing that this person is saying is problematic. And so,
Yeah.
having different people engage in different ways and the right has actually done a better job of that than the left. They are better at honoring that different people have different roles. And so they've got their, the bombastic, really out there speaker, and then they've got incredibly sweet people who are just, lovely, and you're like, how can this lovely person be following this person? Well, they're all playing their roles in a movement, and doing that in a way that is inclusive and is looking out for people. We need to be, thoughtful about how we can include others without saying you all need to fight the way I fight. Because you're right, it'll wear you out.
We all do have our strengths.
Yeah. But I am glad that you are in a blue state and in a place where you are feeling healthier and more supported now. Because it's different to be an advocate than to be somebody who is playing self-defense. Like that's got to be exhausting.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I don't want to, there's things I love about both of those places, a lot of people that I love in those places. And they're very dear to me. And also I'm very relieved to live where I live now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the flip side of that too is people who are, currently living in North Carolina, Texas, whatever, and doing that work are, heroic. But people who are living in Albuquerque and, up the road from me in Portland and that kind of thing, we tend to not see our own needs as much because we're like, oh no, everything's fine here. Well, it's not. And so, doing that kind of reflective work of saying, just because people are not being oppressed as much in the same way here does not mean that there's not a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. And all of us are one federal policy away from a big change of any type. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
so
on that cheerful note.
Yeah. Well, this is a nice palate cleanser here. So the next thing is listener questions. And so you have this came in from Doug. Doug gave us this listener question. Favorite warm beverage on a cold day?
Well, also very topical for today.
Right.
It's right here in my hands. I do love a decaf loose leaf Earl Grey. A little splash of milk. I don't need any sugar or sweetener of any type, but if I can, I don't have this right now, but if I can score a dark chocolate dipped digestive biscuit with it, it's like heaven.
And very British at that point, I feel.
Very, yes.
You're basically having high tea, right? That's,
Yeah.
it's a dark chocolate biscuit. Therefore, yes, you're having tea with the queen at that point.
Oh yes.
I have no class. I am the exact opposite. So like mine is hot chocolate, maybe with marshmallows, maybe with a shot of Fireball. That's
both.
Yep. And when I say hot chocolate, I'm not talking about something that's like fancy. I'm talking about the powder. Then I, pour the powder in hot water, maybe some Fireball.
Yeah, love it. There's nothing wrong with that. I love a good hot chocolate.
On a
or a bad hot chocolate, really.
It's amazing. Yes. Okay, so where can listeners find you and find your work?
Yes. The place I am most present, honestly, right now is Instagram. Specifically my Instagram stories. So I'm at the Marie Parks. Um, but also, if anyone's looking for like actual information about books, uh, Jesse Honard and I share an email list. And you can grab that at marieparks.com. And our Patreon is patreon.com/Jesse and Marie. That's JESSI.
And I will add those to the notes for the show, so people will be
Perfect.
able to
Yeah.
find those as well, hopefully on all of your various podcast listings. But if you can't find those links, hop over to another place to find the podcast, and you will find those there in the show notes, because
Yes.
you want folks to get to check those out.
Awesome.
Okay, so before we get to our send-off, we've got some folks to thank. Thanks to the artist Max Oakland, who reached out, this is very cool, reached out and offered one of his songs for our intro and outro. So that was Max's song you heard at the intro, I Prefer the Dusk. Let Max know that you liked it by following him on Twitter at Max Oakland. Thanks to Halizna CCO for their song Kids for the ad break. If you'd like to submit a song, we'd love to have more of those to work into the song. So be like Max. Thanks to Doug, the producer, for making this show sound good and for taking the blame when it doesn't. And I cannot forget to mention, Writers Not Writing is a production of Not a Pipe Publishing. So please go to notapipepublishing.com, check out all the great books there, including Marie's. And then if you like this show, rate and review it. And I talk about this, I know, at the end of every show, and I always will. Rating and reviewing, not just of the show, but of authors' works, really makes a huge difference. So if you like Marie's book, click on that 5th star, tell her she did a great job. That really makes a difference for authors. So give her that review, make her day. Okay, and then I know I talk too much, so I'm going to make sure to give you the last word. What would be the best possible send-off for today's show?
All right, everybody, stay as cool as an Arctic fox on an aurora brightened night.